Community, identity, stability. How could the world look like in 500 years, when humanity discovers that genocide and war, suffering and emotion, even family and reproduction, are not conducive to a functional and productive society? How will the world react? How will humanity react? This is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. A lot of books come to mind when I think of the theme dystopian. The first books that most people usually think of are likely these two: 1984 by George Orwell and Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. These were likely the books that you were obligated to read in high school, and by all intents and purposes, they're really great and really important books. A lot of people do say that Fahrenheit 451 is boring, but I wouldn't know, haven't yet read it. However, when we think and converse about these books, we always gawk in admiration at really just how accurate these books are at portraying real-world fears and possibilities about the future. Mainly, these horrifying concepts come in the form of something like authoritarianism, the misuse of technology and science, the degradation of human morality and decency, and other various atrocities that we see in small and extremely disturbing forms frequently throughout history. For example, 1984 was made by George Orwell, who pretty much created the perfect allegory against fascism and communism, and really any kind of evil authoritarian government, in the form of his Big Brother character, who represents an all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-observing entity, which can punish and reward you based on your deeds within his confines. Not too dissimilar to some religious figures, but that's a conversation for another time. And yes, for those who don't know, the concept of Big Brother originates from here, and not that god-awful show that we used to watch back in the day. But I would argue that a book even more accurate than 1984 is one of the books that we only think of after we think of these books. And that is the dystopian novel written in the 1920s and published in the 1930s by Aldous Huxley, and one of my favorite books ever written, Brave New World. I would even go as far to say that this particular book is the most accurate and horrific depiction of where the world's currently heading as far as science, technology, and cognitive thinking. And I'll explain why later on. I also happen to believe that this book is better written than almost any other dystopian novel I've read, although I still have yet to read Yevgeny Zamyatin's book, so give me a while on that. And to me, it's just more interesting and horrifying because of its accuracy and its amazing depictions. Today we are going to delve into why I think this is the case and just examine Brave New World in general, because I truly do believe that this is one of the most accurate, frightening, and therefore one of the most important books ever written. My name is Kyle, and this is Brave New World, the scariest and most accurate dystopian novel ever made, that people don't talk about enough, in my opinion. Huxley uses methods existent in psychological history, such as sleep conditioning, Pavlovian manipulation, and drug abuse, to effuse in our minds a world devoid of suffering, devoid of hardship, absent of all that we consider emotional and human. It's basically a world of consistency, where everyone, as the hypnopedic proverb states, belongs to everyone else. Hypnopedia is the term Huxley uses for early onset sleep conditioning, beginning all the way from infancy up to adulthood. Repeated lines of, "I do love having new clothes. Delta children wear khaki. Oh no, I don't want to play with Delta children. And Epsilons are still worse. They're too stupid to be able to read or write. I'm so glad I'm a Beta," are repeated over and over and over again to moralize the students into their caste, forever branding their minds to enjoy their chosen caste in society, to create a good and virtuous worker where all is stable and you're free to have sex with anyone you like, experiencing pleasures beyond recourse. The government of this world, headed by 10 world controllers who they call our Fordships, no doubt a parallelism to Henry Ford, the creator of the combustion engine, giving way to a wave of engineering marvels and industrialism, technological advance, and an easier, more agreeable life, propagates sexual freedom and promiscuity, so that people do not really have long-lasting relationships. No, nothing long-drawn or any real emotional connections, or else people would become affixed to other people, making them dedicated to something more than their role in society. But what the world controllers found out, possibly decades or hundreds of years ago, is that when sex and pleasure is free and without limitations, or as the book says, where everyone belongs to everyone else, then there's no need for real connections, no need for love, or gross family reproduction, or emotional bonds and coupling. No, just pleasure and work and order and stability. And if ever someone does end up getting some melancholy from not developing any connections, forgetting their hypnopedic Pavlovian conditioning for a moment, since humans are of course imperfect beings, then there's always Soma to bring you right back into order. Soma, in Brave New World, is a hallucinogenic drug, very similar to MDMA or ecstasy, which puts you in a dreamlike state in the futuristic golf courses, winning your round, or having the most pneumatic, which is a word that's used in Brave New World for beautiful, but really just meaning physically agreeable, man or woman at your whims, pleasuring you at the feelies, which is their version of the cinema, until you forget all of your troubles and come right back into the proper order of a functional member of New London. This is the world Huxley introduces to us, an industrially and technologically driven world devoid of emotion, relationships, family, religion, stories, history, and love. Brought about by humanity's fear of repeating past mistakes in genocides and war. As we know, war is caused by fear. It's also caused by anger, differences in belief, and tribalism. But what if all of these were just gone? But the only way to get rid of them, to get rid of these nasty hindrances to human evolution, as Huxley may have found out, is to rip the root out of the soil. Emotion, love, hate, fear, sadness, happiness, anything remotely illogical and irrational. This is the cause of misery. But it is also the cause of happiness. It is the cause of all things bad on this earth, just as much as it is the cause of all things good. In this world, there really is no good or bad. There is only what is agreeable and stable, and not agreeable or unstable. There is only what is necessary to keep the functional order of civilization running. And this is perhaps the greatest and most horrific hell we could ever experience. Someone whom I love once told me that hate is not the opposite of love. It is apathy. Indifference, the lack of emotions, is the opposite of love. Having no feelings whatsoever towards someone or something is, as beings who feel, the worst kind of hell imaginable, and a world where I don't think anyone would ever want to live. Huxley depicts this hell poignantly and beautifully, almost horrifically so. The book was written somewhere in the 1920s to the 1930s, and yet still to this day proves itself over and over again. We still see genocides continually throughout the world. This is definitely, obviously, no surprise. But what Huxley gets perfectly spot on is his moral observations of our future. Huxley predicts a general moral degradation in society's future, where sex and promiscuity become more open to all people, of all ages. And yes, I mean all ages, even children, in this book. He predicts a world where less people desire love, and instead desire selfish or singular self-pleasure, where the taboo around our bodily lust becomes less and less prevalent over time. It is perhaps this prediction that stands out as the most morally striking one from this book, and might even be the reason why this book would be so difficult to properly adapt on screen, since there are many scenes that people would consider pretty unsightly. The protagonist of Brave New World is a man called Bernard Marx, perhaps a parallelism to Karl Marx, who is an Alpha Plus in this world's caste system, which is the highest echelon of caste. However, unlike other alphas, Bernard is ugly, short, and generally disagreeable. Fanny, the best friend of Lenina Crone, who is the co-protagonist of this story, speculates that they put too much alcohol in his blood surrogate when he was being created. So now he's different somehow, both psychologically and physically. Normal viviparous reproduction was done away with in this world, because a caste system must have its perfect workers for each caste. They call the process of artificial human fertilization Bokhanovskification, after Bokhanovsky, the one who created it. The concept goes that you put enough of a certain mineral in a certain artificial zygote, fertilized with an artificial egg within a warm mechanical ovum, done in the proper manner with the proper scientific instructions, and out comes the exact beta, alpha, delta, gamma, and epsilon that you want. And with the neo-Pavlovian sleep conditioning, you can create a society exactly as it should be, stable and without hardships or mistakes. But Bernard is different. Too much alcohol in his blood surrogate has made him acquire some kind of emotion, even though they are really generally negative. For example, he hates the way other men in his caste speak about Lenina. They ask questions like, "Have you had her yet?" and reply with things like, "No, but I will the first chance I get," since of course this sort of thing is normal for them. And he relates their conversations to them treating her like a piece of meat. Like mutton, he says, through his gritted teeth. There's something about Bernard that's different, but not in a good way. Something deformed, something emotional and committed, something human. And he needs to watch out, for many reasons. For one, his heart could be broken, since his commitment to Lenina or anyone else may be based on an emotion that only he is truly capable of feeling. And two, that the Forgeships and the greater leaders of this world do not exactly take too kindly to difference and instability. One of my favorite lines from the start of this great work is an example of just how the system has erased everything meaningful and decent from the world. Culture, history, tradition, all emotional and sentimental, all unnecessary. The Forgeship of this sector gives a harrowing speech saying, "History is bunk," citing another hypnopedic sleep conditioning proverb. And Huxley writes, "He waved his hand, and it was as though, with an invisible feather whisk, he had brushed away a little dust, and the dust was Harappa, was Ur of the Chaldees, some spider webs, and they were Thebes and Babylon, and Knossos and Mycenae. Whisk, whisk, and where was Odysseus? Where was Job? Where were Jupiter and Gautama and Jesus? Whisk, and those specks of antique dirt called Athens and Rome, Jerusalem and the Middle Kingdom, all were gone. Whisk, the place where Italy had been was empty. Whisk the cathedrals, whisk, whisk, King Lear and the thoughts of Pascal. Whisk passion, whisk requiem, whisk symphony, whisk. They were all gone, disappeared, just like dust. Brave New World is very good at taking all the parts of humanity that we consider the most human, like family, individuality, sexual reproduction, literature, art, and romance, and completely obliterating it before your eyes. And the worst part is this allegory that the book depicts isn't even completely unrealistic, because the themes are so universal. It's just a fact of life and human nature that all of the aforementioned qualities have historically brought about the downfall of humanity's greatest societies time and time again. Huxley knows this and poses the question, what if we just had enough of these things? What if we realized that these were all just hindrances to the greater good of human progress and what we consider as happiness. What if we became sick of the constant cycle of the rise and fall of every major civilization and just wanted stability? Happiness and contentment are also some pretty philosophically interesting plot points in the book, because for society to function, all of its inhabitants from every caste have to pretty much be convinced that the society they're living in brings them the most amount of joy and an easier life. And an easier, more agreeable life to these inhabitants is pretty much their equivalent of happiness. It sounds sad and devoid of our conception of actual happiness, but the book makes it clear that they really don't know any better. Sure, human nature's curious urge comes into play very infrequently, making them sad sometimes or melancholic, but their solution is just to take soma. Take this pill and you'll be fine. All your sadness will disappear. But really, the saddest part is that their sadness is not necessarily replaced by happiness. It's just replaced by pleasure and distraction, away from the deep-seated sadness that everyone has within. So, Brave New World asks the question, what is true happiness? Clearly, happiness is not just a drug which gives you illusions or distractions. It's something deeper, more profound, and even perhaps more painful. Huxley poses the idea that the only thing that can beget true happiness is suffering. This idea is aligned with Nietzsche and definitely represents a lot about the reality of life. The journey that Huxley takes you through in Brave New World is simply brilliant. For example, these are all the themes that only I have personally found, but are by no means the only interpretations that one can have from this book. The book delves deep into drug use, the degradation of society, the difference between civilized people and uncivilized people through the lens of what the book calls the savages, who are basically similar to Native Americans or tribal Mexicans. This part of the story mirrors Huxley's experiences living in California and experimenting with various hallucinogens, such as mescaline, which is a psychedelic compound coming from the peyote mushroom, and LSD. It's ironic how Huxley creates this harrowing allegory of soma, a hallucinogenic drug made to numb the mind from reality in the present, and yet he himself takes very hard hallucinogens. Now, that might seem hypocritical, but he does say in most of his papers that he does this to understand the different perceptions of experience, making it as if he does it almost purely experimentally. But, of course, Huxley also many times professed for the many benefits that come from taking these drugs, such as self-transcendence. He believed that non-addictive drugs like mescaline could provide a shortcut method to obtaining a better understanding of the self. And this is particularly exhibited when, at the end of his life after a long battle with cancer in Los Angeles, he asked his wife Laura to inject him with LSD as he slipped into the hereafter. Huxley's experiences with drugs allowed him to write many of his great works, such as The Doors of Perception. He maintained, however, a strict rule of a controlled environment in which these mental experiments could be conducted. He states that if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Through the massive skylines of lights in New London, to the conveyor belts of human zygotes in the infant hatcheries, to the squalid depths of the savage inhabitants that the civilized people like to visit like ancient human zoos, gawking at the disgusting families and relationships they have with each other. Brave New World is a dystopian horror unlike any of its time. And I use horror in the real sense of the word. This is not a supernatural foray or a fictitious scarefest. Brave New World is just simply showing the horrifying realities of becoming inhuman in our search for humanity. The concept of manufacturing humans is ironically one of the most inhuman things. It goes from something about romance and passion to something scientific and chemical. There is no poetry, no soul. It's just putting together a few chemicals, mixed with a few minerals, to make up a blank slate of a human. Fit perfectly for their predetermined role in a very functional society. As the creation of man from these test tube-like conditions seems pretty morally degrading, so too is their treatment towards children. Now, I'm not going to get too into the subject because it's quite touchy, but in my opinion, the most screwed up scene in this entire book comes very quickly in the second chapter, and trigger warning, it involves the tacit abuse of children. I know that sounds horrible, and that's mainly because it is. As I mentioned before, the morality of this world is very different from ours. This is not us today with our 21st century ethics. This is us hundreds of years in the future, where moral relativity has changed our ethics completely. And this is especially true in how this world treats the aging process, from childhood all the way to the elderly. Children in this world are viewed as way more adult-like, because there just seems to be a casualness in the way that they describe them. Playing games in the man-made biosphere laboratories like things called erotic play. Now, one can only surmise what that means exactly, but for me, the most frightening thing is that although they treat them in an adult-like fashion in this regard, the language they use to communicate with them is almost infantile. It's pretty much baby talk. They talk to them like they're infants, yet treat them like adults. They infantilize their minds while simultaneously poisoning their biological and sexual development, advancing it far beyond their years. And it's really this sort of casual scientific abuse that makes this world so powerfully awful. And I completely would recommend preparing yourself for these themes if ever you do decide to read it, because it's really, really harrowing. Huxley seems to use this casualness as an allegory for moral relativity, or the advancement, or rather, degradation of our moral standards. It's true that society does become more tolerant of even the things we now consider the most abhorrent over the course of time. And although this is a wild extreme, Huxley shows us that it's not impossible to be this ethically disconnected with enough time. And that's what makes these themes all the more scary. It's mainly for this reason I think that Brave New World just has so much difficulty in being adapted properly to screen. How can you depict the reality of these abuses properly without just depicting it? You obviously can get away with it in text, although I'm sure 1930s Great Britain was not very happy with it at the time, but it's just so difficult to really convey it on screen and still getting the right message across. I mean, imagine the backlash one would incur if you depicted children taking state-issued drugs like Soma just before going to do something like erotic play, so that they can adequately prepare themselves for the electric shock therapy and sleep conditioning that they will receive later. I mean, just imagining these scenes as a filmmaker immediately brings you to the conclusion that we just can't include these in there at all, but taking away those themes would pretty much completely diminish the power and the purpose of the story. So now you're in a position where you have to have it, but you can't. And as an artist, that's a tough road to traverse. Maybe in the future some great filmmaker like Denis Villeneuve or Christopher Nolan will find a way to get the right message across without going too far into showing the crazier stuff, but as of now, I really can't say that the on-screen adaptations we've seen scratch the surface of the powerfulness of the book. In literature, you can just simply get away with a lot, which is why, even if we do have the Brave New World series, which I believe was made by Paramount, you'll never really get the Brave New World experience unless you get to reading the book. But hey, maybe a Chris Nolan adaptation will fix this, and believe me, my fingers are crossed. I will campaign to the ends of the bloody earth for Brave New World to get properly adapted, because this book, I really believe, deserves it. And yes, it deserves it way more than 1984, although that technically already does have a movie adaptation, to be fair. The themes in Brave New World of fascism, scientific abuse, dehumanization, moral relativity, and authoritarianism are far more indicative of our current society than any other dystopian novel I've read. And it would only benefit us to see this book adapted properly to a new and wider audience, if at least done correctly. Now granted, I haven't yet watched the Peacock series that was made on it, but judging by the reviews, it's not going to be the most accurate, so again, I'll say, read the book. It's not even that long actually, it's like 150, 160 pages I think. Yeah, just read the book. Something that I wanted to note at the end is an observation I had while reading the book for the second time. Many people don't consider Brave New World in the same level of high dystopia that they do for other major sci-fi works. And I would argue that this comes not from any blandness in the story or the characters, but from the fact that Huxley's sci-fi fantasy is no longer a fantasy at all. Nowadays, we have an extreme morally relative world, coupled with very loose conceptions on genetic human incubations, stem cells, reproduction, and artificial intelligence. We also are very lenient in our acceptance of mind conditioning. I mean, we know that the films we watch and the entertainment we have are all nascent versions of conditioning, of distraction, to make us believe that we are okay and to forget the present horrors of everyday reality. Basically, our own version of Soma. The pharmaceutical industry in itself is a known massive ploy keeping people just healthy enough and sick enough to make the most amount of profit. Technocrats do rule the world now, and we have somehow convinced ourselves to conflate scientific and technological progress with social progress, when they are entirely different and actually very often opposed with each other. War is abundant, and we are never satisfied, but what happens when war almost destroys us? I mean, of course, we go right back to our comforts, to distraction, to conflating pleasure and sex for happiness. This is our reality, and it is getting more and more apparent every passing minute and every passing day. So, the feeling of lacklusterness that a lot of people might have towards Brave New World comes from the very genius of its author. Brave New World suffers from its success because it so accurately predicted everything that would happen. Or rather, everything that is currently happening. Moral relativity is a fact. The want to escape reality and cover all the world's pains under the carpet is more real than ever in our society. And science is and has taken over our lives. Science has replaced and is continuing to replace philosophy, poetry, writing, and other old mediums of beauty in our world. And this is precisely why I believe Brave New World needs to be read by more people, because it shows us the true nature of our actions and the true betrayal of humanity that the world might be becoming. Hello guys, this is Kyle. I hope you enjoyed this video. Wanted to ask, what do you think of Brave New World? Have you read it? Do you plan on reading it? And do we think it's possible that we could see a Brave New World movie at some point in the near future? Tell me what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.